Jesus Freak here. I'm gonna pop in and out of frame a bit to explain my point. It so happens a lot of what I'm gonna be using for props is just slightly out of reach from where I'm shooting this video. Now, I've had some people express surprise that I lived as well as I do, given that I'm living off SSI and my food budget's less than $300 a month. You know, well, once I go over, I'm having to pay in cash, but. And I'm like, a lot of the stuff that I have, I rely on a lot on, cheap stuff. It's not necessarily secondhand. In fact, the major secondhand places around here are a ripoff because they decided that they'd rather get less sales, get a few sales from hipsters rather than more sales from people who actually would benefit from secondhand stores more. So, actually, sometimes it's cheaper to buy new at Wally World than it is to buy secondhand at Salvation Army or Goodwill. But, I am wearing something, and it's not the shirt that comes from the Goodwill in Lockport. So, I do shop at secondhand stores. Another thing is there's only a few things where brand name matters. Yeah. There's a few things, I'm not gonna buy some store brand version of this because there's an actual difference and it's actually pretty marked. I've had someone say, I buy the Aldi's macaroni and cheese that tastes the same as KD. I'm like, your taste buds are fried. That stuff tastes nothing like KD. So, with that, yeah, I will buy the brand name, but I've shown some people pictures in my kitchen. Like, I'm looking right here. I got my cartons of soup broth on the shelf. I have a carton of Tops brand with a carton of Wegmans brand right next to it. Sometimes I'm aware of situations with the brands. I go out of my way to buy the Wegmans pasta sauce because it's a good deal and because of its connection to what until very recently was a relatively local company, in that Wegmans pasta sauce is literally Francesco Rinaldi without the name. Something that, under the old ownership of Francesco Rinaldi, was not hard to determine. Because their website specifically mentioned that not Francesco Rinaldi's site, but the owner of Francesco Rinaldi at the time, that they produced private label for Wegmans. So it was kind of an open secret. So I'm looking over here, I got on this shelf, canned tomatoes, Tops brand, Sam's Club brand, Aldi's brand. And about half these cans of soup are Wegmans. I can see a can of Aldi's brand corned beef hash. my tea. Some of it's Wegmans, some of it's Tops, and some of it's just whatever was on sale. Yeah, there's some things that are brand name out of necessity. The only the only store brand ramen I know of is No Name, and that's a Canadian brand. So obviously, that's off limits for me right now. Besides, who goes to Canada just to buy ramen noodles? So it's like, I keep an eye on prices. I think I do pretty well considering my situation. I've had people think I was weird for saying I liked hardcover Bibles better than leatherbacks. Yes, I have some leatherbacks. Yes, I've even bought some with my own money. Yes, I even have an R.L. Allen that I bought with my own money. It's about the bottom of the line R.L. Allen, but yes, it's an R.L. Allen. I bought it with my own money. That doesn't mean necessarily that I prefer them. Of course, I'm happy to do business with a company, that puts, even if indirectly, people who work in the first world. Their printing is done in the Netherlands. Their binding is done in England and the Netherlands. That particular R.L. Allen is produced in the Netherlands. And I've occasionally mentioned that, some of the cheaper Bibles I have were produced in Italy. I have Spanish Bible produced in Belgium. And I'm like, I'm willing to go out of the way for that because if I have the money, I'd rather buy good. I think it was Terry Pratchett who said, oh, you buy some cheap pair of shoes because it's all you can afford, and you're going to be buying the same cheap pair of shoes over and over and over. But if you got enough money to buy a good pair of shoes, that pair of shoes is going to last you longer. I used to stick to buying, $10 no name shoes and they'd fall apart. I mean, I had a pair of $35 shoes, and this, we're talking 1990s, so, $10 and $35 means something different than they do now. But back then it was like, I'd have these cheap shoes that last a lot longer because, you kind of get suckered by paying for an expensive brand that's basically a status symbol. Yeah, my current sneakers are Reeboks. Of course, Reebok isn't as, cachet as it used to be. But I'll say this, the Reeboks I've been wearing for years have certainly held up better than some random El Cheapo brand. So I've kept buying Reeboks. Because it's like, yeah, I can afford it. Of course, the previous pair of Reeboks I bought was a store return and was half off. And I think the pair before that I got on sale. If I can find a deal, I don't get a problem with that. So, like, I'm looking at these plastic containers that I'm using because I said, not only they can save a bit of space, they can also vermin proof things a bit. And I'm seeing a couple containers that cost me like $6.50 at Dollar General, and I kept being like, why can't I find what I want at Dollar General? Why can't I find what I want at Family Dollar? Turns out I found what I wanted at Dollar Tree. Who'd have thunk? You know, I found these canisters, specifically designed to hold spaghetti, which was exactly what I was looking for. I had one of them, I did have one of them fall off the shelf and break, and now I got to rebuy my spaghetti because I had these containers stacked way too high. That's my fault. But you know, I'm going to solve that. I'm going to get more shelving once I clear out some space where there used to be a mountain of junk in the kitchen. I'm going to put some more shelves up there, and I'm going to split some stuff off. I'll probably put my pasta over there, and I won't have the problem with having to stack containers 6 high on the top shelf. But that was my fault. And what did I lose? $1.25 for the container, and maybe about $3.50 for the pasta. Right? So I'm hardly out anything. I had to move the shelf over a little bit because I had it where, stuff would fall behind the door and I couldn't move the door. So I had to move the shelves so I could move the door and get behind it. Now, you might say, but you do have some name brand stuff on your shelf. Like I said, a lot of that, there's no real substitution or it was on sale. Like, I had a box of Jiffy Mix. It was something I was going to fix and never got around to fixing it. And there were exactly two brands, Jiffy Mix, and there was some real super El Cheapo, like El Cheapo beyond El Cheapo. And I said, you know what? I think I'd rather take the brand name. But that's because we were talking the bottom of the barrel El Cheapo. Like cheaper than dollar store level El Cheapo. In fact, I think Dollar Tree carries Jiffy Mix. To give you an idea of how cheap I'm talking this other brand was. I think it was like 33 cents or something versus 75. Yeah. But it's like, I hardly ever buy it that I need to save 30 cents on a box of corn muffin mix. Or like, I got 3 jars of Better Than Bouillon here. Different flavors. It's not like, it's not like I was stocking up on anything. They're different things. It's like, yeah, I bought an expensive brand. I bought it when it was on sale, and it was about the same price as some normal brand of bouillon. In fact, the bouillon that I had had before and threw out when I was cleaning out my shelves was the same price that I paid for the Better Than Bullion. So I just waited for it to go on sale and bought it. And of course, the specialty stuff, like I got. Don't fall down. Like, these are basically, vacuum packed udon. It's not exactly udon, but it's close enough. And I'm like, there is no other brand in any store nearby. There's no store brand version. I mean, who really is going to be buying Japanese style soup noodles in Western New York? I mean, yeah, these are not exactly that. They're a little bit thinner than udon noodles. There's some, but they're the same idea. So it's like, yeah, I buy Kame because there's hardly ever anything that Kame sells that has any other brand. Like, yeah, get a bottle of Ryu here somewhere to some other brand, but and like, I got some sesame oil around. It's some Japanese brand. I think it's Karuya. There's some things that don't have store brand equivalents. My Tabasco is Tabasco because there's no other version of Tabasco than Tabasco. Nobody else makes it. So it's like, I can't. You could say, oh, you could buy some store brand Louisiana style. That's a clone of Red Hot, not Tabasco. Red Hot's made with a different kind of pepper. It's a different product. Besides, I think Tabasco is about 5 times hotter. Never mind the fancy Tabascos that I have. So it's like, sometimes I have no other choice. Well, I could opt not to buy it at all. But what's the point in that, It's like, yeah, I can go without. I don't need it. Like, I'm not going to die without it. But, I understand that. Like, this shirt has Philippians 4:13 on it. I can do things. I can do all things through the one who gives me strength, Christ. You look at the context of that verse, it's like, I know how to have and not to have. I can deal with situations where I might not have enough to get by. That's what Paul is saying when he's saying, I can do all things through the one who gives me strength. He's not being like, oh, I'm Jeebus man. I can do anything. I can imagine some new thought type saying, oh, I'm Jeebus man. I can do anything. And jumping out of a window thinking they can fly. That's the kind of inanity I would expect from someone reading that verse out of context. And I'm like, yeah, Once in a while, I treat myself. I buy a Carvel cake maybe once a year, sometimes not even. And like, over the last few years, it doubled in price. I might actually go back to buying Duncan Hines and making a box of cake mix again. I mean, I don't need a birthday cake. If I go without a birthday cake, I'm not going to starve to death. But I think it's that mindset. I don't need to keep up with the Joneses. I don't need this, that, and the other thing. And when a lot of us realize, you know, we don't know what need means. And it's something I keep saying to myself, and I keep telling others. It's a look. When you're when you're saying, I need this. Stop and ask yourself, am I going to die without this? No. Then I don't need it. I want it. And often I'm like, I really could use this or that. But I'm going to die without it. That's why I've been limping with 2 dead hard drives on my desktop for years. Because I've had more important things to deal with than buying a piece of equipment for $150 that I don't really need. Sure, it's quality of life improvement for me. I don't need it. I can do just fine without it. I think that's why I live as well as I do, given my means. You know, I look at other people's income as, they don't really have much more than I do, if they have any more. And they're in hock up to their eyeballs. And they're mystified. I'm like, look, do you need to keep up with the Joneses all the time? I do more with less. Maybe my life's a little bit less fulfilled because of it. Do I look like I'm lacking in anything significant? I got a gut. I'm not lacking in food. I got a roof over my head. You know what? I got my basics. That's all I need. I get more. That's a bonus. As long as I have that, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm going to try to get more. It's called being a human. But I understand that I don't need it. It's just quality of life. Jesus, freak out.